Timmy Failure, Mistakes Were Made is directed by Tom McCarthy. It's based on the novel of the same name by Stephen Pastis, and it's currently streaming on Disney+. It focuses on a young boy named Timmy Failure, who with his pet polar bear, Total, runs a detective agency titled Total Failure Incorporated. Although Timmy's life starts to come caving in as he causes more and more bad things to come his way. When I was a wee lad, there were 3 book series I would read: Timmy Failure, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and Captain Underpants. Obviously, these aren't literary classics, but as a kid I loved these books. So far, all the Diary of a Wimpy Kid movies have been just awful, especially the 4th one, and while I didn't hate the Captain Underpants movie, it can only be described as mediocre and forgettable, so I was really hoping Timmy Failure would be great. Then, as I continued watching, I lowered my expectations to good, enjoyable, tolerable, viewable. The best way I can describe this movie is like this. Legendary film critic Roger Ebert once said that the movie Mad Dog Time was, I'm paraphrasing, the first movie he's seen that doesn't improve on the sight of a blank screen viewed for the same length of time. Yeah, that's essentially how I feel about Timmy Failure. There's more than handfuls of jokes in this movie that don't land. In fact, virtually every joke in this movie just made me check the time to see how long was left. That isn't exactly the goal a comedy movie strives to achieve. There's this running joke that everyone hates Russians, but there's absolutely no context to this joke at all. Like, there's absolutely no weight to this joke to make it funny. And a lot of the other jokes are basically just jokes anyone can think of while they're just walking around, like, oh, fencing classes teach you about fences! Hee-ha-ha-ha! So, pretty much all the jokes are pretty typical, and the ones that aren't don't have enough weight or context to be funny. This movie feels like a very stretched-out, feature-length episode of Family Guy. In Family Guy, there are these gags called Cutaways, and that's when someone makes a comparison or a reference that has some implications that make us jump to conclusions, and then they cut to the thing that happened and flips what we thought on its head. An example of this is when a character threatens someone with, "Fess up, or I'll do to you what I did to John Lennon." We think that he's hinting that he shot John Lennon, but then it cuts to him introducing John Lennon to Yoko Ono. So, now you know what a cutaway gag is, so it should make sense when I say that this movie is filled with cutaway gags. Maybe every couple minutes there's a cutaway gag, and that might work for a 15-minute episode of Family Guy, but not a 100-minute-long movie. As I said, I've been reading the Timmy Failure books since I was a wee lad, but I'm not letting that cloud my judgment. I'm not one of those guys who watches a movie based on a novel and complains that it's unfaithful. In fact, my favorite novel adaptation is Fantastic Mr. Fox, and that's probably the most unfaithful adaptation ever. The reason I bring this up is so I don't seem biased when I say that this movie completely strays away from the tone of the novel. The novel is like Airplane, where it's just completely random that it's hilarious. It has no plot, it just throws one hilarious joke at you after the other. On the other hand, the movie is a coming-of-age movie that attempts comedy and fails. I think that if this movie followed what the novel was going for, it would have been way better. Especially when you think about what the novel is about. It's about a boy who clumsily runs a detective agency with his pet polar bear. If this went for what the novel was going for, the movie would have been like a modern-day Mel Brooks movie or a modern-day Monty Python movie, where it's joke after joke after joke with complete randomness as the punchline. I found all the characters in this movie to be extremely lacking. So lacking that any attempt to affect me emotionally did not work at all. An example of this would be this bad thing that happens with Timmy's polar bear, Total. This is supposed to be a sad scene, and in the novel, it actually was sad. But Total maybe got 5 scenes, and in those scenes, we see him mess up everything, and often him and Timmy don't even interact. And so I just didn't care enough. A big subplot of this movie is Timmy Failure's detective agency, which is a big joke. His detective agency just bases their evidence on fabricated nonsense, and that's the joke. but this subplot takes up so much time, and it was just irritating to watch. The worst part about this subplot is the writers thought, hey, you know what? This subplot with no effect on our characters needs long expository scenes explaining completely useless information that has no effect on anyone's viewing experience if they don't know them. There are actually several subplots with no payoff, and I don't mean no interesting payoff, I mean no payoff. There are just so many scenes where they start a subplot and cut it at the end of the scene. Another big subplot is that Timmy is participating in an animal rights protest from his school, and this subplot is not only completely useless, but it moves extremely, excruciatingly slow. Like, take the animal rights protest out, and it won't affect the movie at all. There were some awful performances in this movie. Timmy Failure is played by a young actor named Winslow Fegley, and all his line delivery was so monotonous, like enough to be a substitute beaver tranquilizer. I guess they were going for a type of young Sheldon thing, but I think that show's super overrated, so I hated his performance. And there are a few other performances from actors who I don't know the name of, but they were all pretty bad. Like, nothing from the main cast really stood out, and the good performances are just side characters. The two good performances were Craig Robinson as this guidance counselor helping Timmy, and Wallace Shawn as Timmy's teacher, Mr. Crocus. Craig Robinson maybe gets 5 or 6 minutes total, and Wallace Shawn got about 3. These were actually good performances, and I almost didn't hate the movie because of them, except I ended up hating it anyways, because in total, these actors got about 9 or 10 minutes. Probably the worst part about this movie is our main character. Timmy Failure is such a bad main character. Usually, we're supposed to sympathize with, or at least understand our main character, but we can't with Timmy, because he's a massive jerk. We spend the whole movie watching him be a jerk to everyone, and you'd expect that to change by the end of the movie. Nope. You know how in movies there's always a part where the main character hits rock bottom, but it ultimately makes them stronger and a better person? In Timmy's rock bottom, he's nice to everyone, and then when he gets himself out of rock bottom, he goes back to being a massive brat. So Timmy starts out terrible, gets better, and then goes back to being awful. Honestly, this movie just feels like an exclusionary inside joke no one is a part of. I'll make Timmy Failure Mistakes Were Made the first recipient of my lowest grade. An F. This movie makes Ready Player One look like a cinematic masterpiece. I'm talking Citizen Kane level comparatively. And there are better novel adaptations than this movie. Fantastic Mr. Fox is one. It's also on Disney+, and you'll love it. But in terms of graphic novel adaptations, if you're looking for one, I definitely recommend V for Vendetta. This movie is a coming-of-age movie that fails at being a coming-of-age movie. Honestly, I can name a few better ones. The Perks of Being a Wallflower, The Breakfast Club, Stand By Me, The Outsiders, the Toy Story movies, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, basically any movie by John Hughes. And this movie is trying to be a detective comedy, but there are better ones. And those are Rush Hour and The Naked Gun. Both of those movies are great, hilarious comedies that, unlike this movie, are well worth your time. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed. Before you leave, how about you comment your favorite film adaptation of a novel? Mine is... well, actually, I can't really say because I have way too much. But after you're done with that, stay safe and watch good movies. Bye!